Hello, welcome back to the Tifo Football Podcast. No Joe Devine again, sorry about that, but you do have me and you do have Alex. Hello, Alex.
Good morning, Seb. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well, mate. And you will also have Iain Hume, who dropped by to talk to us about the head injury he suffered in 2008. And it's absolutely fascinating conversation. And Iain talks about what happened after his head injury, his recovery from it, his career afterwards, how he looks back on it today. Before we get to that, though, we are going to have a little talk about international football because we've got an international break at the moment. Alex and I are busy watching different fixtures and different games, and we've come up with some ideas to liven up international football a little bit or help it to compete with UEFA's plans for the new Champions League. You know, try and give it a little bit of an equal footing, you know, as club football expands. Welcome to the international break. Alex, what have you been watching?
I watched Serbia, Republic of Ireland last night.
That was a good game.
It was a good game. It was interesting for a couple of reasons. I think I like Dusan Vlahovic, and I wanted to see how he did.
We like Dusan Vlahovic.
Okay, we like him. Yes, you like him too.
You.
Yes, absolutely. And he scored a lovely goal. Just a very good kind of bursting run through on the left-hand side. Dare I say it, slightly Haaland-esque. And, well, you know, the timing of the run, the position, the physicality to hold off a defender, first-time finish across the goalkeeper. It was also interesting to see the Ireland side line up in a back three for the first time, apparently, in quite some time. I have to say I don't really follow Ireland as an international side, but I know there was quite a lot of chat about how that would work. Seamus Coleman as the widest right-sided centre-back, which I think was an interesting move. And yeah, I mean, it was a good game. It was quite fun. It was quite feisty. Josh Cullen, I thought, caught the eye in central midfield and did well.
Yeah, I was generally quite impressed with the football the Irish played. I know there's this kind of residual negativity that surrounds the national team, and I understand they've been through sort of Trapattoni and, you know, the O'Neill, Roy Keane times, and it hasn't been that positive for a long time, but I thought it was quite progressive. I was also stunned to see Alexander Mitrovic's first finish. I didn't think he was capable of that kind of goal, I'll be honest, with the kind of the deft, lofted lob from 35 yards. I associate him with just moments of force.
Yeah, well, I think what was particularly good about that finish was that it took advantage of Mark Travers' poor positioning, I think. Yeah. And you could see as the ball came across Mitrovic, a fractional glance up. So he assessed that situation and then executed the lob really quickly. It wasn't like a chance thing that, you know, because there was a defender closing in on him, he thought, oh, I may as well give it a go. That was very much a response to checking where Travers was in a fraction of a second and then unleashing the chip. So yeah, very, very impressive finish. The second Mitrovic goal was more like, I guess, what we'd expect from him.
Yeah, and not the best forward performance of the night, because before that I watched Turkey against Holland and I saw the 35-year-old Burak Yilmaz score a hat-trick against the Dutch, and Frank de Boer's Netherlands, which is really interesting because it's a little bit like me hosting this, fucking it completely, and then being asked to go and host the Totally Football show. I mean, it's just such a... But Alex, it's such a weird career trajectory. It's just, anytime he kind of appears, it's oh, okay, how did that work? What was the kind of the background to that happening? And Holland were dreadful. There was a period in the second half where they looked like they might rescue something from it, but Turkey were by far and away the better side. They just looked more cohesive. The football they played was better. They were incredibly efficient. I mean, I think they probably had, by the time they were 3 goals up, which was just after half time, I think they'd probably had maybe 3 or possibly 4 good chances in the whole game, and they took them all. And it was super impressive. What's your take on De Boer, though?
Yeah, I don't understand, really. I mean, you know, there is not a... You can't look back at anything that he's achieved in his managerial career and say that there was emphatic success. I mean, I think he did some good things at Ajax, but obviously Ajax are already a very dominant club in the Eredivisie. They always have exciting young prospects coming through, and so it's quite hard not to do relatively well at Ajax. And also there's, I suppose at Ajax there's a philosophy that permeates that club that means that coaches kind of naturally gravitate towards a certain style of play that's effective. But then if you look at Crystal Palace and Atalanta, Atlanta. I don't even remember his time at Inter Milan. I'll be entirely
very,
honest.
very short. That's why.
But the Palace thing, which was, we've talked about this kind of thing before. It was supposed to be a transitional period for Palace, moving away from a kind of almost long ball, direct vertical style of play towards something that was more possession based, more careful. It completely fell apart. And obviously then, Roy Hodgson had to come in and rescue things. Atlanta didn't work out either. So you have to wonder how somebody has effectively continued to fail upwards. Because, the Netherlands job, we'll talk about international football in general in a little bit. And, obviously it doesn't necessarily carry the cachet that top club management does. But it's a big job, and the Netherlands on paper can put out a squad of really exciting talent. Some of the younger players, particularly in attack, but I'm also thinking of players like Gravenberch and Koopmeiners and in midfield. There's a huge amount going on in the Netherlands, and why would you give it to him?
That's the thing that struck me last night, because there is an under-21 tournament going on at the moment, the European Championship, and Tiaan Koopmeiners was involved there with the Dutch. Ryan Gravenberch presumably is there too. But last night they were able to field Matthias de Ligt, Frankie de Jong, Memphis Depay, Steven Berghuis. This was a good side, Jorginho Wijnaldum. I want to talk a little bit about Tim Krul though, because he did his thing. Like the second Turkish goal was a penalty, and Tim Krul's career has now been condensed into the way he behaves before a penalty is taken. After that penalty he saved in 2014 against Ecuador, I think, Paraguay. Anyway, he just kind of gets in the face of the player taking the kick, doesn't he? And in an empty stadium, it's really quite an ugly aesthetic, because Ilnaz is sort of ready to take the penalty, and he's just standing on his line, waving his hands, shouting at him, and then of course he just stands still, and Yilmaz rips it into the top corner. It's just like at some point this kind of crosses the line, and I've moaned about this a couple of times before, generally on Twitter, but it really annoys me. It's just stop it, just stop it. That's a kind of it's nonsense, and it's beyond that kind of line of sportsmanship that's supposed to exist.
It's difficult, isn't it? Because I mean, penalties are so weighted against goalkeepers that I'm slightly, I suppose, sympathetic to things that goalkeepers try to do to gain any kind of advantage. And it's interesting what you said about the fact that without fans, just in an empty stadium, that sense where matches can almost look a little bit like a training game, not necessarily in terms of intensity, but the absence of the kind of whipping up that occurs in the presence of fans. I think it's weird, isn't it? Because we have had a lot of time to get used to there not being fans, and how that changes the dynamics of the game, and in some instances, like you say, the aesthetics of it. And I'm still not really used to it. But then I was thinking the other day, I can't remember what game I was watching, but I was thinking, what's it going to be like when fans are back, when we start seeing fans again? And crucially, how will players react to having that enormous hiatus of nobody else in the stadium, and then suddenly coming back into it? And you can expect almost the cauldron to be stoked more than usual, because fans will be so pleased to be back there and so excited and desperate to kind of show that they're back. It's going to be a very weird psychological transition for players who've already undergone a series of very weird psychological transitions.
Yeah, that's a really good point actually. And also, like I've only covered one empty stadium game this season, and it was so boring. It was so boring. It was Tottenham against Leicester, and if I found that dull, and I kind of found my senses sort of diluted by what was sort of happening around me, or the lack of things that are happening around me, I wonder what effect that will have on players once you kind of deliver that jolt of adrenaline, or whatever happens to a player when he's playing in front of 60,000 people. Like I think that's going to be, I don't know, are we going to see like a kind of a spate of really rash moments?
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
I'm kind of thinking of slightly nostalgically, almost like what's it going to be like for Jefferson Lerma playing in front of fans again? because that red card will come after, I don't know, 2 minutes. It's going to be great.
Has Jefferson Lerma ever got through a game without being booked? Ever?
I
Has
don't
he ever
know.
done it? No.
I kind of want to set up like a sort of math rock band called Jefferson Lerma is Suspended. So I think that's a really good band name.
Catchy. Okay, so coming into this pod, I put on the plan with UEFA's tanks on FIFA's lawn in terms of sort of how club football is changing and how it's going to kind of grow into, well, I was going to say vacant space in the football calendar, but there isn't any of that. So they're just going to make some which doesn't exist. So we were coming up with ideas for how you would kind of match that growth and profile if you were a kind of a stakeholder in international football, and asked you to come up with an idea. What do you have for me, Alex?
Right. So I'm going to preface this with my sub idea first, which is nothing to do with no. Just, and I'll be very quick, I promise. It's nothing to do with making international football more exciting, but I do think that the awarding of tournament hosting rights should be independently monitored, and there should be an external audit carried out by somebody. I don't know who. I mean, I don't know, maybe like the United Nations or someone, but that takes into account things like workers' rights, human rights, the attitude towards the LGBT community, that kind of stuff, so that we don't find ourselves in a position where we bounce from Russia to Qatar over 2 World Cups. That is a very brief point. I think it's
so you want kind of an ombudsman, really, to
basically. I want like an ethical ombudsman to stop
okay.
tournaments being awarded to places that they shouldn't be.
Yeah, that's
but
a really good idea.
That's nothing to do with football being better. So my idea for football being better is, what we like about football, international football, is the tournament aspect, right? We like all the teams condensed together, playing over the course of a month. Everyone gets excited. It generates a lot of interest and enthusiasm and so on. So let's do that for qualification as well. So every other year, the year before the Euros or the year before the World Cup, we have, 6-week period where all the teams get together and they qualify in a series of kind of mini games that lead towards that process. The advantages for this are international football is often not as good because teams get much, much less time to train and practice, and so players tend to end up working in fairly basic systems. Defense is easier to coach than attack. You get stuff just kind of transplanted from the dominant club tactical identity of the time. That's why we're seeing an awful lot of back threes in international football at the moment. This would allow coaches a bit more time to actually coach stuff. You could have maybe a 2-week run up before that tournament period started, and really get to grips with how a team plays. It's environmentally more friendly because you're not having teams jetting all over the world across the course of a whole year. It's better for player welfare because you could also then strip other international football out of the calendar. You'd have more breaks. You could even establish like a winter break in England, for example. And you get the intensity of tournament football. You're effectively creating a mini tournament ahead of the tournament, which I think would drive up revenue. It would make it easier to broadcast. It would protect the players. It's better for the environment. And yeah, that's why we should do it.
Oh, I really like that. That's an excellent idea. It's actually not dissimilar to what I came up with, which is that I'd like to create a tier system for international competitions. So I would keep the qualifying system as it is, but if you finish third or fourth in the group, then you go into a parallel World Cup / European Championship for teams roughly within your own bracket. The advantages of this are that, most basically, exposure for players who, come the end of a qualifying campaign, are kind of forgotten about, go back to the home nations, probably their domestic leagues, and are never spoken of again. It would also give proper tournament experience to lesser nations. And with that would come things like commercial and broadcasting interest in the tournament. So like our World Cup Europa League, where, you know, Slovakia are a heavy favourite or whatever. You're actually, as long as you scheduled it outside of the dates of the other tournaments, and I do appreciate there's a little bit of a logistical wrinkle to work out there if we did it that way, but you would kind of focus the world's attention, broadcasting attention, commercial attention, and some of that money in a perfect world could be spread out to the participating football associations, which would, again, help things like development and infrastructure. And I just like the idea of involve more teams in tournaments without ruining the existing ones. So obviously Gianni Infantino's dream is to create a World Cup group stage with 700 sides in it and 3-team groups, or whatever the fuck that idea is. But this gives teams the ability to compete in their own tournaments and their own competitions, to get used to it and to pull all the advantages of doing so. It's just that's my idea.
I like it. I think obviously our two ideas logistically don't quite coalesce, but I think the key point is, in order to avoid, because what I don't want to happen, and I think you don't want to happen, is that we get a kind of European Super League style international football situation where the top 10, 15 teams are so entrenched by the finances of their domestic game, the pool of talent available to them, etc., that I guess the balance is, how do you play San Marino without, in a situation where San Marino gets something from that in terms of finances, development opportunities, that kind of thing, that it's not just a procession for teams. You want to up the ability of those smaller teams to be able to contest things, and the easiest way to do that is to give them more money and to give them experience of playing higher level tournament football.
To give them a chance of winning.
To give them a chance of winning,
absolutely.
Yeah. And like you say, that there are teams like Slovakia, Slovenia, for example, who within a European context produce some very fine footballers who would be in a position maybe to, and I guess that, the Nations League has an aspect of this, and I can understand why that sort of approach has been taken, but it's a little bit like rugby, isn't it, where you have tier 1 teams and then tier 2 teams, and after the World Cup qualification process has occurred, I believe there is also a tournament for the lesser nations that they can play in if they don't qualify for the World Cup. And I guess, rugby is very entrenched as well, so maybe that's a bad example, but you want these teams to be contesting stuff and to have the opportunity to grow and develop and test themselves against good teams. And otherwise, without that parity, you're just going to get, a qualification process for the Euros that's strung over 6, 9, 10, however many months it is, where England play San Marino and Liechtenstein and Luxembourg, and that's the kind of thing that turns people off international football, really.
This is a perfect chance for us to segue to a conversation with a former Canadian international. So this is our chat with Iain Hume, and wanted to get him on the pod for a really long time because for those of you who don't know, Iain suffered a very, very serious head injury after receiving an elbow to the head in a championship game back in 2008. The scar from that, the fractured skull he suffered, was a life-changing experience, and he very kindly came to talk to us about that and about his path back from that experience and from the injury and from all the effects that it had. Okay, Iain, welcome to the pod. And straight off the bat, we're going to clear up a little bit of an anomaly which comes up on your Wikipedia page. So you were born in Scotland, and your Wikipedia page says that as a child, you were a fan of Ian Rush, John Barnes, and John Robertson. So that's two Liverpool players and a Nottingham Forest player, which for our younger listeners, that's a pretty big rivalry from that period of time. How does that happen?
Is it the same John Robertson?
Is it Nottingham Forest John Robertson?
It's Heart of Midlothian's John Robertson.
Okay. I should have clicked one more time, shouldn't I?
My family's all from Edinburgh, so they're all Hearts fans, season ticket holders, a lot. So when I first started watching football, the first ever game I went to was Heart at Partick Thistle.
Okay.
So I think I was about 8-year-old. First game I ever seen, first professional game, was John Robertson was playing up front, and he's their legend. He's their equivalent, obviously on different levels, but they're equivalent to what Ian Rush was with Liverpool. He's just a bit of a legend there. So he was my first ever hero.
So you didn't model yourself on a slightly overweight, very, very slow winger.
No. Well, he was
brilliant player,
possibly slightly overweight little striker. So that kind of is what I sorted my career on.
How are you at the moment? What are you? You retired, I think, officially in 2019. So what are you up to at the moment?
Well, I've not officially retired.
Are you not? Okay.
No, well, pretty much. My last game I played in India was just about 2 years ago. Wishful thinking. I was, in an ideal world, I was hoping to finish my career over here in Canada, play in front of the family and just go out with a bit of a swan song season. But things never materialised. I guess they didn't want anybody who had nearly 600 games under their belt and all that. I guess I was a little bit too long in the tooth for them. But that's fine. It is what it is. So I'm the most unofficially retired player in the world right now. I think I'm on par with like Yaya Toure and all that, where they've never played but still saying they're playing. But now I'm moved over to Canada with my family. 7 months ago? Started up a small coaching and fitness training business. So with my brother. So we're just plugging away. It's kind of frustrating, obviously, as it is with every walk of life right now with the pandemic. So we're kind of limited to what we can do. But I'm working on my coaching badges. I've finished my UEFA B license in Wales last year. So now I'm just trying to get a bit of experience before I jump into my A license. And the pandemic's kind of shot that down. So I'm kind of just in limbo waiting for a bit of field time.
Let's talk about your playing career. You had a really good career at the top of the Championship. You're at Tranmere, you're at Leicester City, and then you're at Barnsley. And I'm going to issue a little bit of a warning to people that don't know the incident we're going to talk about, because it's upsetting and pretty shocking. It's something that will stay with you if you've never seen it before. But let's talk about November 2008 and what you remember about that day.
Everything. It's a strange one. Obviously, it was something that wasn't a regular in the game. I think previous that out of note that people had obviously heard about in the press and whatnot. The only other one that happened previous to my injury was Petr Cech.
Yes,
and that was obviously well publicised. Premier League footballer, best keeper in the world at the time. And he gets a knee to the head. So all of a sudden, it's unprecedented. They hadn't witnessed and worked with this sort of scenario before. But then it comes to mine, and possibly I don't know the ins and outs of Petr Cech's one, but possibly mine was a little bit more severe, and just an elbow. It wasn't. Listen, I'm in defence, although I've no worries about talking about it. In defence of Chris Morgan, he's gone to hurt me, but he's obviously not meant to do what he's done. So that's where I'll draw the line. Like, he didn't mean to hurt me to the extent he did. He meant to catch me. Fair enough. It's part of football, unfortunately. But yeah, just fractured my temporal lobe. I thought it was just concussion. So did the club doctor. Sent me home. And this is where all protocols, and it's interesting talking about this, because when I did my UEFA B licence in Wales, the head of physiotherapy for the Welsh FA is a former teammate of mine, Sean Connolly. And he actually, in the middle of doing the CPR side of the course, he actually brought me up and talked about like my injury, as it changed the concussion and head injury protocols for all of British football, because I obviously got sent home. So rather than being sent to the hospital just to get a checkup, they sent me home with what they thought was severe concussion. It wasn't until the roughly, I'd say, 10 o'clock the next morning, because I just went home, took my suit off, went to bed. The next morning, I was just talking rubbish. I just couldn't string sentences together, and when I did, they didn't make sense. And I know people say I talk rubbish anyways, but it was kind of in a different context. It was strange, because that's the one part I don't remember about it all, is I don't remember what I said, and my wife was just saying, well, listen, we'll go up to the hospital. So I was living just over the Pennines. I was living just in Saddleworth. And we went to the local hospital, and they did everything, did all the concussion protocol checks and in the ER and all that, or the A&E, sorry, and they discharged me. So they actually sent me home.
What kind of test did they run on you? Because you'd suffered a fractured skull.
But there was no depression and there was no swelling.
Okay.
So it literally just seemed to them, because obviously if you have a broken bone, like if it's anywhere else in your body, your arm's disfigured, it's either swollen or whatever, or your leg or ankle or whatever it is you break, it's some sort of disfigurement. Whereas with mine, there was nothing. There was no depression, so the bone hadn't broken inwards that they could see. There was no excessive swelling. So they just did their triage tests for concussion, as they would do for every Joe Blow. And they sent me on my way. And when we were walking out the doors at the A&E, I spewed up everywhere. Like I was literally maybe 6-10 feet away from walking out the doors. So obviously alarm bells ringing for them. Guy with a head injury thrown up everywhere, rushed me in for a CT. And what they obviously didn't catch with the triage testing was that my temple had broken inwards. So whatever swelling there was possibly just on the surface. So where the bone had broken in, the swelling had replaced where the bone was. So they didn't really notice any difference. And as soon as they rushed me in, my temple was spread out around the left side of my brain and covered in blood. It was an emergency. They rushed me in, obviously. Next thing I know, I'm waking up in a hospital bed, and I was in there for 8 days. And it's obvious. You look at pictures of me now, it's something that I'll never ever forget. The moment, the situation, obviously the week after, the months after. But it's part of my story, and it's something I'm not afraid of talking about. It's just something that I'm happy that they've changed the way things go as far as head injuries and protocols and whatnot, and long overdue, to be honest.
When you look back on that period now, like I think I've read, we've never spoken before, but I think I've read in various places, I think you spent 48 hours in intensive care. Is that right?
I have no idea.
Yeah, sure. I'm probably asking the wrong person, right?
No, I don't know if it was 48 hours. I know I was in a medically induced coma. I know that. That was probably, I think it was maybe 12, 18 hours, something like that. It wasn't anything excessive, because I think I was under the knife for about 4.5, 5 hours. And then medically induced coma. And then I was in my ward with some interesting characters, to say the least, but it gave me an opportunity to push on with my Football Manager on my laptop, so I got a couple seasons done.
When you're in that situation, presumably when you come to after that kind of operation and you've got your wife and your kids around you, your family, first of all, presumably they'd say, Iain's going to be fine, it's going to be okay, this is his sort of prognosis as a human being. How long was it between that conversation and you having a conversation which was, well, when can I get back to playing football? Can I get back to playing football? Because before we started recording, you said football is what you know, and that's your profession, it's your livelihood. So How long does it take for your mind to click into that way of thinking?
It was as soon as I spoke to the specialist, to be honest. As soon as I was discharged, I had to go and visit a specialist. I think it was like 2 or 3 weeks later, just to see how the staple. Well, obviously the staples were still in, so I had to get the staples out, and then so I went back to my GP to see about the staples. Got them out, and then I had to meet the specialist just to check that everything was okay. And to be honest, it was that appointment where I just said, "How long is it going to take?" He's like, "Well, obviously we don't advise that you go back, and if you do, maybe go back with one of those like Petr Cech helmet things." And
yeah,
I had the club physio there, and I just said, "Not happening. It's not me. It's not. Listen, if it's not going to happen and I don't go back, then I don't go back. But if I'm going back, I'm going back the same way I came out." That's just my mentality. That's just the way I am. And anyone who's watched me play, it's balls to the wall all the time. Like that's me. I put myself in the line of anything that I possibly can for the people around me. And it was just never a question for me. And as soon as he said, well, you can go back, but as soon as he said, well, you can go back, that was where it ended for me. That was where I had enough knowledge of it's not going to, that's weird to say it, but it's not going to make me worse.
yeah.
I was back running with the physio a month later. He was coming out just before Christmas. So it happened on November 8th, had the operation on the 10th. And I was back running around because I lived in a little village. So my physio would come over and I'd go for a run with him every 2-3 days. Just a little jog, just to get myself doing something. And I was doing that just before Christmas. So it was something that I was just chomping at the bit, to be honest, to get back as soon as I was out.
I was at Stamford Bridge the day that Ryan Mason's career finished. I sat in the press box, which is probably about 60 meters away from the penalty box, and it's the sound that stays with you from that, I think. And obviously, I kind of followed what happened with him, and I'm a Spurs fan, so Ryan Mason's obviously an ex-Spurs player, and so have a fondness for him. And I remember reading the things that he would say, and also the kind of the periodic appearances that he'd make on radio or podcasts. And he would talk about when he was trying to rehab, the stage that you're describing now, and having to deal with kind of really intense headaches and having difficulty with light and feeling very vulnerable because of the type of injury he'd suffered and because of its potential impact, because of how it related to his brain. And is that something that you have to overcome to get back to doing something as mundane as jogging or, just general fitness training? Is that a kind of a hurdle that you have to leap? Or is it just, with you, is it just automatic? Right, this is what I'm doing. And that desire to return to your profession kind of excludes everything else. Is that more of the way it was for you?
Yeah, obviously circumstantial for likes of my injury, and Raul Jimenez just did the same thing, Mason's injury. It's circumstantial for how you approach the recovery side of things. And for me, like I said to you before we came on air, football's all I know. I have no education. I left school when I was 15 years old, moved over to the UK. I had nothing to fall back on. Never played for a club that was... And this is, and I hope people don't take this the wrong way. I'm not saying this to be not nasty, but disrespectful to Ryan Mason's decision. But as a Spurs fan yourself, he came through at Spurs. He had widely respected at Spurs, had a great relationship with everyone at the club from grassroots all the way up. They made sure after his decision he was sorted. Insurance-wise, he's already made millions and millions of pounds. He's done this, he's done that, and they sorted him out with a job. You know what I mean? So, and don't take this the wrong way. He had something to fall back on. Myself, I'm a football man. I'm all I know. I'm a football geek. I've known the game, played the game, moved away from my family when I was 15 to pursue my career. But I knew that was it. That's all I had. So for me, as soon as I was given half a green light, that's a green light to me, and I was back. Ryan Mason, it's a different scenario, and I don't know the ins and outs of his injury in comparison to mine. But a head injury obviously is a head injury, and it has to be taken seriously. He had cushions to drop onto. I'd love to think that he wanted to continue playing. But there are elements of risk. Myself, it was a risk that I had to take. It wasn't a risk that I could afford to say, okay, well, I'm done. I was I was 26, so it's a hard one to put. But for me, as soon as I was given the green light to start running, listen, there were headaches, but just fractured my skull, so I knew that was going to be there. The light I had to get a prescription glasses. I couldn't drive for 6 months. I had prescription glasses to help me read, because obviously I was getting a little bit of pain on the left side of my head when I was reading. So there were elements of kind of protocols that I had to stick to. But again, it reverts back to, I knew what my end game was. I knew where I was going to be in 5 months, 6 months, 7 months, whatever. I knew where I wanted to be and where I was going to be. So I approach it a little bit different to some people. Not saying it's right, not saying it's wrong, but it's just the way my head, even after the surgery, the way my brain is wired.
Funny question for you, and I don't know how you're going to answer this one, but what were you like to live with during that period? Because I've heard stories of people who suffered head injuries, and I think it was James Cracknell who got hit by a car when he was riding his bike. And he and his wife ended up divorcing because it changed him as a person. I know it's really difficult to be objective about yourself, but were you aware of kind of like moodiness or unhappiness during that period, or were you just kind of the same but just physically impaired?
I was, from what my wife says, I was a lot better to have around. Just it brought things into context, and obviously we only had one daughter at the time, and that actually had us sitting down, because we went into family planning. It was one of those things. I went to a football game, and it's the first home game that she'd not been to. I think pretty much ever. So especially since we had our daughter, and my daughter had her first school birthday party. So that's the one game they never came to. So her dad came to the game with me, and my wife Chrissy and her mum and my daughter went to a birthday party. So to them, the one game they don't come to, and I almost don't come home. You know what I mean? So it's we sat down and we started planning again for a baby, and we got pregnant not too far after. I think it was just after the New Year, or I say round about March or April. We started talking properly about having a baby, and I think it was by the summertime we were pregnant. According to her, I was a lot better to have around. Obviously, I was constantly away. Every other weekend away games, every other weekend or every day training, and then international duty and whatever. I was away half the year all the time. So she says that it was great to have me around, and I was a lot more relaxed, obviously, because I knew it was something that was out of my control. But yeah, I don't think I have read about that James Cracknell story about him being tough to manage, and I remember reading that.
Strange one, isn't it? But, it's a really strange tale. It's a really sad one as well.
Unfortunately, it's one of those when somebody feels very, very helpless, and something's happened out of their control. You've got to understand. Like, I'm not saying it's right. It's not right that the family's broken up because of it, but it's something that, in a way, from the outside looking in, you can understand, because obviously his world's been turned upside down. Whether it's he's reacted the right way and held the wrong people accountable for it, but that's, again, we don't know what's happened indoors.
Yeah, of course. I don't pretend to know very much about James Cracknell rowing or his life before and after his accident. I remember just seeing it. I think I saw a BBC documentary about what happened to him and kind of the differences between him before and after. Just something I knew very little about. Let's talk about Chris Morgan, if that's okay, because what happened to you reminds me of, in a way, the Pedro Mendes Ben Thatcher incident at Manchester City. And as a fan watching that, just as a fan, someone who saw that on television, I find that changed forever the way I think about how exposed a player is and kind of responsibility, the responsibility professional players have to each other. I kind of, I'm not even sure how to describe that, but it's like a respect, a kind of...
it's a sportsmanship.
A sportsmanship is, yeah, exactly. That's the right way to put it. in that situation, actually, Adonis saw what happened to you for the first time before we started recording, and I was listening to his reaction, and that's quite telling. How did you feel about the incident and Chris Morgan's part of it in the weeks and months afterwards? And how do you feel about it now?
First, weeks and months after it, it's one of those. There's a lot of elements of it that I'm ridiculously unhappy about. Well, pardon the language, I'm a bit pissed off about, because I've looked back on it, and Andy Durso was referee.
Yeah.
And
former Premier League referee, Andy Durso. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, God rest his soul, Ugo Ehiog was playing alongside Chris Morgan that day. And I was up front, and I was just getting lumped everywhere. Every time I went up for a header, they were coming over the top. Every time I went for a challenge, they were coming through the back of me, blocking runs. And listen, I know it's part of the game, but it's also part of the game for the referee to protect players, regardless who they are. So I just said to it, listen, Andy, said, do me a favour, just keep an eye on these guys. They're smashing me everywhere. And it's a bullying tactic. It's 2 6'4" guys, 2 6'3" guys up against a 5'8" striker. It's not nice when that 5'8" striker competes and coincidentally wins quite a few headers against you. I know it's not nice. I understand that. But I told them to keep an eye. I think it was about 15 minutes into the game, 20 minutes into the game. I just said, listen, keep an eye on them. And then this ball's come in, and I had no right to win the ball. I wasn't expecting to win the ball. I was just trying to get in the way. So I was coming in. Chris Morgan's in front of me. And it's funny how, because obviously I've seen, because it went to civil court, whatever, or it didn't go to the court. It went civilly. The club and myself, we were seeking a little bit of retribution about it all. I've seen witness statements from people, from character witnesses, which was ridiculous. I'm the type of player who entices centre halves into these things, and blah blah blah, and so on and so forth. And
enticing centre halves into fracturing your skull.
Yeah, and it is what it is. But Morgan's looked over at me. Anyone who's watched the video, I'd love to actually rewatch the game leading up to that, if I could ever get the video from somewhere. But he looks over at me and he knows I'm coming. And the thing is, he's, like I said, he's a lot bigger than me. All he had to do was head the ball. He's planted his feet, so it's not like he's got the excuse of he jumped and he had to raise his arms for leverage. He was planted. But he's looked, he's seen me coming, and he swung his arm back at me. And anyone who says differently isn't watching the TV screen when they see the highlight, because it's evident to everybody. And then, like I said prior, he's gone out to hit me. He's not gone out to do what he's done, and I'll never ever say he has. Because I don't think he's that type of human. I don't think anybody's that type of human. He's meant to catch me. He's meant to leave a mark, whether it's face, neck, whatever. He's meant to leave a mark. To the extent it went, obviously, I'd like to think he had a little bit of regret about it all. But again, I don't know, because I've never spoke to him.
Have you not had any contact with him since?
When I was in hospital and everything, I never heard anything about him trying to contact me. When I played, like we were talking about before, regarding my first game back, played Gainsborough Trinity in the pre-season game the following season. And I came on sub. I was only supposed to come on for like 2 minutes. And Simon Davey put me on about 25 minutes left in the game. And I was gassed after about 30 seconds. It was mad. I think it was just and I've just gone through a whole pre-season, so it's not even like I'm not fit.
It's not the same, is it?
No, but it was the adrenaline. It was just the fact that I've 8 months and I'm back on the field, and it's like, okay, I've got to do this, and I'm a million miles an hour everywhere. And I don't know if you remember the big centre back, Adi Moses.
Oh yeah, okay.
Played for Barnsley, Huddersfield, and all
Unit.
that. He played for Gainsborough, but I'd played against him for years, so I knew him. And he was playing for Gainsborough, and I'd come on sub, and he's buzzing, and he's clapping me on, and shakes my hand, and great to see you back, and this and that. The ball's gone out for a corner, and me being me, getting the box, the ball's come across. I've jumped across 80, headed the ball, and he turns around, and he goes, "What the hell are you doing?" What do you mean? He says, what are you doing? I said, I'm heading the bloody ball. I said, I'm trying to score. I just missed the top corner by like a foot. I'm like, nearly an incredible goal. He goes, yeah, don't do that crap around me. like, come on, man. But it was literally after that game, I got a text message through. Good to see you back on the field. Hopefully we can sit down and have a beer over this sometime. Morgs. I'm like, what? Like 8 months later and you finally reach out? But again, on the flip side of things, when after it all happened, he's a Barnsley lad. So he was former captain. He came up through the youth system and that at Barnsley. And me being me, I felt terrible because he had bricks through his window and all that. And he's got a young family, and I hated seeing that, and I felt bad for him. I just wish that feeling was mutual on the other side of things, but it is what it is. And listen, I have no hard feelings anymore. I'm done. It's a part of my story, and it's gone on. I've played 400 odd games, 350 odd games since then. So it's not like it stopped me playing. It did hinder my career. I'm not going to lie, and I'm not just making excuses, because even up until this day, I'm still getting questioned about, oh, how's your head? How's this going? How's this? And this is from coaches and clubs, and it has put a little bit of a shadow over what I thought could have been more.
That's a kind of an aspect I hadn't really considered, because you got 40 caps for Canada. You win the League One title with Doncaster. Am I right in thinking that?
We did indeed, yeah.
You did indeed. Okay, you won league titles in India as well. You've had a really good career, and this is what you're associated with. You know, I remember I first dropped you a message after, I think probably around the time that Raul Jimenez got hurt, just because I didn't know very much about head injuries or what it takes to recover from them, and I saw what happened to you, and I remember following the story in real time. And is that a difficult thing where you think, well, I'm a footballer and this is me, and I've done all these things, and also, yeah, like you say, I mean, your career didn't finish in 2008. You played for more than another decade. Is that hard?
I think it's just because of the manner of the injury, people associate it differently with recoveries. Like, how many people now are questioning Aaron Ramsey after he broke his leg at Stoke?
Yeah, that's true.
Guys moved to Juventus. Guys played for Arsenal and Wales and played in Euros and all that. And people are like, oh, it's a leg break. He's recovered. He's okay. That's fine. Like he's actually moved on to the Italian champions.
Yeah, well, I was gonna bring Petr Cech into it, because I remember. Do you remember after he suffered his injury? Anytime he would go like a couple of games without, with a bit of bad form, or occasionally he'd drop a clanger. I mean, he's a world-class goalkeeper. He used to probably make like 3 or 4 mistakes a season at most, and yet whenever it happened to him, it was kind of, oh, this is the end. This is a goalkeeper who was. He was barely 30 at the time. Won a European
Cup.
It's
easy for commentators.
Yeah, it is, isn't it?
And unfortunately, it gets even worse nowadays, because people know that negative words get more press and they get more attention. And unfortunately, it is what it is. And Petr Cech went on to prove a hell of a lot of people wrong, because the guy is, and for me, is still the best keeper that England's ever seen in the Premier League. And this is coming from a Liverpool fan. The guy's a legend, and he could still play today. Like, he still trains daily.
I think he was on he's in their Champions League squad as some kind of security option or something ridiculous. Yeah.
Well, there you go. Like, the guy's still able to play. It's not like he's a goalkeeper coach. I think he's helping out with the goalkeepers coaching and all that, but I don't know. Again, I don't know the ins and outs of his injury. I know it was a hairline fracture or something like that. It wasn't to the extent of possibly, and I'm not saying this badly, to the extent of possibly mine, Jimenez and Mason's. But it was still a neurological surgery. Like, the guy had to have something done to his skull and to his brain to fix himself. And he came back, and as soon as he makes a mistake, it's the question mark of, oh, he's not the same. Do me a favour.
Just 2 more questions. The first is, Adonis and I were talking about this before we start recording. When you go back to training, do people treat you differently off that injury? Like if you're, if like you're doing a crossing drill, for instance, or you're just having a bit of five-a-side, and ordinarily, like I imagine, normal club environment, you're a nippy forward who's kind of, I imagine you to have been a bit of a pain to play against, quite relentless.
Indeed.
Yeah. So, under normal conditions, someone's going to clatter you. Someone's going to rattle through you just because it's training, and why not? Does that side of things change after you've had a head injury like that?
Simon Davey approached it the right way. The physio team was brilliant. Like, I mean, top lads who I'm still in touch with now, and we tiptoed back in. So obviously, insurance purposes, I couldn't get into games and all that before the end of the season, although I was ready. So I was back training in February. I was back in with the club like mid-February. So I was doing physio work and strength training and all that, and we knew it was going to take another couple of months, so we didn't rush it. And then I did everything I possibly could fitness-wise. So I did like a full pre-season and a half. Like I was as fit as I could possibly be without doing anything contact or with the guys. I started pestering Simon Davey, and like I still keep in touch with him as well to this day. And I pestered him like weeks in a row, just saying, listen, let me get involved. Let me come with the lads, even if it's just for 5v2s and just a floater or stand on the side as a wall or whatever. And he finally gave in. I think it would have been around like end of March, something like that. He finally gave in to me. He goes, okay, go on. Get involved in the 5v2s before we train. Yeah, essentially, yeah. He goes, Hume. Like, he kept saying, Hume, no, keep going. Like, I'm running with the physio doing a warm-up. And like, Hume, keep going. And he finally let me in. So I went into the 5v2s, and the ball's normally kept on the deck. And we had a couple Brazilian players and Spanish players and all that, and they're tricky. And so I'm in the middle. I lost the ball. I go in the middle. And I'm ratting around trying to get it back, and he tried to chip it over me. Like just a little scoop, and I've jumped and headed it. And it's the first time I've had a ball.
Yeah.
First time I've had a ball not with the physio. And the whole session stopped. And like Jamal Campbell-Rice and Ko J and all these guys, Martin Devaney, they're all looking over like, the hell are you doing? And I'm just like, what? It was just reaction, and it's instinct. And the fact that I didn't worry about it, as soon as I did that, I knew I was on the track, and I was on the right track, and I was in the right frame of mind to step it up. And that was it. I sat down with Simon after that training, and I obviously edged my way in a little bit into full training. And by mid-April, I was full training, doing absolutely everything the guys were doing, plus some, because obviously they're playing games, and then I'm running like a donkey up the hills and all that. So, yeah, that was for me. That was the turning point. And the lads knew me. The lads knew what my mentality was like. And it was never anything different. After that moment, I think for them all to see that I wasn't thinking about it, that I was just buzzing, I think that changed their perception of how to treat me. And I think it was a massive one for me, because the first thing I did was head a ball, and it was sort of a weight off my shoulders. And I think it allowed the lads to stop tiptoeing around the situation and the circumstances of why I was out, and just welcome me back as me. And I think that was the best thing about the club at the time, was we had such a great group of lads who were very vocal, but the compassion that they had for me when I was injured went out the window, which I loved. It went out the window as soon as I came back, because they knew I was back to who I was before. And I think that was the major turning point for me.
Presumably they also realised that part of you getting back to where you were before the injury involved them treating you as the player you had been before it happened. So knocking you about, Is it really that? This is going to sound really strange, but there was, do you remember the Sky One show Dream Team? Yeah, there was a storyline which is really similar to this, and I'm not trying to be trite or to take away the severity of what happened to you, but it reminds me of it, because one of his main characters, he has a problem with his eyes, and he has a really complicated neurological surgery to kind of cure it, and he's walking around. No, it was Luke Davenport. He was a rival to Fletch.
Yeah, okay.
He has this surgery, which I don't know if it was medically possible, but it was in Dream Team world. And he's walking around for like 3 episodes with a full head bandage, like a villain in Scooby Doo, basically. And no one knows if he can play again. No one knows if he can play again until he has a scrap with his roommate who just clocks him with the right hand and knocks him over in the bathroom. And it's kind of like your heading scenario. Everyone's like, "Oh my god, what's happened?" And he gets up. And he's just like, "No, you just punched me in the face, and I'm fine. It's great." Yeah. Is it that different, the before and after? You've headed the ball, which is instinctive to you. You've done it your whole life because football's your career. And then from that moment on, you think, I'm okay. Like I can do this. And so I can kind of engage with a different gear in my recovery.
For me personally, it didn't make a difference because I'd already been training with the physio and I've been doing like heading in. I had a couple nerve problems leading up to getting back in with the guys. So I had nerve problems. So every time I headed the ball, and regardless where it was, depending on the side of the head, I was getting shooting pains from my ring finger up to my elbows and my shoulders. Yeah. So it was something I had to work out of me and work that it was the new norm, or I thought it was the new norm. It only lasted for about a month or so. But then by the time, for me, I already knew where I was and how far I'd come. And with working with the physio, Chris and Seji constantly, I knew that I was on the right track. But for the guys to see that I was back and to see, obviously, their firsthand that, okay, he's had the ball, to see there was a shift in how they approach me. It was no longer, "Oh, how's your head doing? How's things?" It was like, "Oh, what you doing after training? You fancy coming for coffee or you whatever?" Like it just a little switch in how they kind of approach things. And although I was already there mentally, I think for them, even if they didn't notice it, even if they didn't realize that they changed, I noticed it right away. That all of a sudden it's like, okay, there's no longer a worry about him coming back. It's when. And if not for insurance purposes, I probably would have finished the season. Because I was, like I said, I was 100% fit and I was just lacking game time I think it was by mid-April. So I did have a chance to get back, but there was far too much red tape to be cutting through. So that was it. That was like I said, that was the turning point for me. To see the guys re-approach me as a player instead of an injured player.
It's been so interesting, Iain. We've kept you far longer than we were supposed to, and you've been really, really generous for your time. Thank you so much, and thanks for coming on the podcast.
No, not a problem. My pleasure, guys.
Thank you very much to Iain for giving us his time. We kept him for far longer than we were supposed to, but it was super interesting, and I learned an awful lot. Okay, thanks for joining us. Next week, Joe is back. We haven't really heard from him for 5 days, so anything could have happened to him.
Do you know what I think he's been doing, Seb? I think he's been extremely busy filling out player entries for Joe's Facts and Quotes database. That's what I would hope, anyway.
Well, one thing that he definitely did was I tried calling him last night.
Oh, did you?
And
Why did you do
it wasn't.
that?
It wasn't a work-related thing, but he just hung up on me and didn't call me back. Like he didn't say like, "Oh, I'll call you back in 10 minutes." But then I woke up to a text message at 1:30 saying, "Oh, sorry, you called me."
He did submit a voiceover at about 1:45 this morning, which is completely wild.
He does live very strange hours when he's on annual leave. Anyway, he'll be back next week, and that podcast will be released on Tuesday. Thanks for joining us, and thanks to Alex.
Thank you very much, Seb. Excellent job hosting.
Farewell, everyone.
The Athletic.